Kyle Mercer, a freelance graphic designer of 29, sought the deep, unforgiving embrace of Redfern State Forest in upstate Maine. His recent 6-year relationship had imploded, leaving him adrift, and this solo camping trip was meant to be a therapeutic cleanse, a rugged reset button for his fractured heart. Though he'd grown up in the suburbs, Kyle loved solo hiking, often documenting his trips for a small YouTube channel, a testament to his confidence, perhaps even arrogance about being unbothered by the wild dawn. It was mid-November, just before winter clamped its icy grip on the land. The forest was eerily quiet, stripped bare of its vibrant autumn foliage, leaving skeletal branches reaching towards a perpetually gray sky. The air bit with a crisp, penetrating cold that promised endless nights. Few other hikers dared venture this far into Redfern, especially with its barely marked trails, poor reception, and the chilling local legends of the Pale Ones. Kyle, however, scoffed at such tales. He was a man of logic, a product of the digital age, and the idea of strange figures seen by hunters in the 1950s seemed like quaint folklore, nothing more. He found a secluded spot deep within the woods, setting up his tent near a small frozen stream, the only sound the occasional creak of ancient trees in the biting wind. The beauty of the place, even in its starkness, was undeniable by day. He spent the first day hiking, capturing breathtaking footage for his channel, narrating his journey with an almost performative bravado. The solitude was initially a balm, the vastness of the wilderness dwarfing his personal woes. He cooked a simple meal over his portable stove, the aroma of dehydrated food mingling with the crisp, cold air, and watched as the short day quickly surrendered to the endless night. As darkness swallowed the forest whole, the temperature plummeted. Kyle retreated into his tent, the thin nylon a meager barrier against the encroaching cold. He scrolled through his phone, hoping for a signal to upload a quick update, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. The isolation, once a comfort, began to feel like a heavy blanket pressing in on him, amplifying every subtle sound. It was then he heard it, a faint twig snap just beyond his tent. He froze, listening intently. Another snap, closer this time, followed by a soft, almost imperceptible rustle of leaves. Kyle's logical mind immediately went to animals, a deer, perhaps, or a curious fox. He tried to ignore it, pulling his sleeping bag tighter, dismissing the prickle of unease as the natural anxiety of deep woods camping. But then came the humming, low, rhythmic, and undeniably human-like. It seemed to circle his camp, a soft ethereal melody that sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't a tune he recognized, but a wordless, haunting drone that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. He strained his ears, convinced it was just the wind, or perhaps the echo of his own heartbeat, but the sound persisted, circling him like an unseen predator. He tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation, but the humming continued, sometimes fading, then returning with renewed intensity, always circling. He imagined figures moving just beyond the reach of his flashlight beam, their forms indistinct, their purpose unknown. The arrogance he had felt about being unbothered by the woods began to crack, replaced by a growing primal fear. Sleep was impossible. Kyle lay awake, his heart pounding against his ribs, every nerve ending screaming. The humming seemed to seep into his very thoughts, twisting his anxieties, making him question his solitude. He imagined eyes watching him from the impenetrable darkness, unseen presences closing in, their strange song a prelude to something terrifying. By dawn, exhaustion had set in, but sleep offered no true rest. He emerged from his tent, his muscles stiff, his eyes bloodshot, the cold air doing little to dispel the lingering dread. The forest, once beautiful, now felt menacing, its silence pregnant with unseen threats. The humming had stopped with the first hint of light, but the memory of it, and the feeling of being watched, clung to him like the morning frost. The second day dawned gray and short, the sun a pale, indifferent disk behind a veil of clouds. Kyle, despite his exhaustion, felt an urgent need to move, to shake off the lingering dread of the night. He packed up his camp, his movements stiff and deliberate, his eyes constantly scanning the dense tree line, a new paranoia gnawing at him. He tried to tell himself it was just the isolation, the lack of sleep, but a cold certainty settled in his gut as he broke down his tent. He saw it, a small, intricately carved wooden totem, half buried in the frost-hardened earth just inches from where his head had rested. It was crude, yet disturbingly detailed, depicting a gaunt, elongated figure with hollowed-out eyes, its arms raised in a gesture that was either supplication or warning. Kyle's breath hitched. This was no animal. He examined the totem, his logical mind struggling to process the implications. Someone had been here, close enough to place this disturbing artifact while he slept. The humming, the snapping twigs, it hadn't been animals. It had been human, or something human-like. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through him, far more potent than any fear of wildlife. Then he saw the footprints, barefoot, impossibly long, pressed into the thin layer of frost around his campsite. They were distinctly human in shape, but too large, too slender, and unnervingly devoid of any discernible arch. They led into the deeper woods, disappearing into a thicket of thorny bushes, leaving no trace of their maker. The pale ones, the local legend whispered in his mind, no longer just folklore. Kyle's arrogance about being unbothered by the woods shattered. He was not alone. He was being watched, stalked, by something that moved silently, leaving disturbing calling cards. His therapeutic escape had transformed into a terrifying trap. He grabbed his pack, his heart pounding, and decided to leave. The thought of staying another night was unbearable. He turned to retrace his steps, following the barely marked trail he had used to enter. But the trail was gone. The familiar landmarks, a distinctive fallen log, a cluster of moss-covered boulders had vanished. The trees seemed to have shifted, their branches forming an impenetrable wall where the path should have been. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at his throat. He tried his GPS, but the screen remained blank, no signal. His phone, which he used for his YouTube updates, was also dead. The battery drained despite being fully charged the night before. He frantically tried to call for help, but there was no service, only the mocking silence of the forest. He was truly alone, and utterly cut off as he stumbled through the dense undergrowth. Desperately searching for any sign of the trail, he noticed something else. His gear. His backpack, which he had meticulously packed and placed by his tent, was now slung over a low branch several yards away. His water bottle, which had been full, was empty. His small first aid kit was open, its contents scattered. Someone had moved his gear while he slept. The realization was chilling. The entity, whatever it was not just watching him. It was interacting with him, playing a terrifying game. It knew his habits, his vulnerabilities. The thought of unseen hands touching his belongings, rearranging his world while he was unconscious, filled him with a profound, visceral dread that eclipsed any fear of physical harm. As the second day quickly faded into the long, cold night, Kyle found himself deeper in the woods, lost and disoriented. The whispers returned, closer now, weaving in and out of his own frantic thoughts, insidious and seductive. "You belong here," they hissed. "You always have." The forest, once a place of solace, had become a living, breathing prison, and he was its captive. The third night brought not just whispers, but a palpable cold that seeped into Kyle's bones, despite his efforts to maintain a roaring fire. The air itself felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence that pressed in on his makeshift camp. The whispers were a cacophony now, 1,000 voices screaming his name, tearing at the fabric of his mind, twisting his deepest fears into grotesque realities. His breakup, his perceived failures, the lingering guilt over his brother's accident, all became the entity's most potent weapons. Visions of his past, of the arguments, the choices he had made, played out before his eyes with horrifying clarity. Each detail magnified, each moment of regret amplified. The whispers accused him, condemned him, until he found himself curled on the forest floor, sobbing, convinced of his own unforgivable culpability. His logical mind, his survival instincts, crumbled under the relentless assault, leaving him exposed and vulnerable, a raw nerve in the heart of the woods. The forest, too, descended further into its shared delusion. Kyle ventured out, desperate for any sign of a way out, but found only a disturbing tableau. Trees seemed to shift, their gnarled branches forming new, impassable barriers. The ground itself felt alive, roots snaking and twisting, almost guiding him deeper, away from any familiar landmarks. The air hummed with an unnatural energy, a low thrumming that resonated in his chest, pulling him further into the unknown. He stumbled upon a clearing dominated by a massive ancient oak tree, its roots thick as python coils, its canopy blotting out the moon. Around its base, he saw them, dozens of hand-carved totems, larger than the one he found, depicting the gaunt, hollow-eyed figures. They were arranged in unsettling spirals, and among them, more of the strange, barefoot human-like. Footprints pressed into the damp earth, leading into the tree's shadowed hollows. The whispers intensified inside the clearing, no longer just external, but merging with his own internal monologue, making it impossible to distinguish his thoughts from the entity's insidious suggestions. "You belong here," they hissed. "Join us, become one with the roots." He saw glimpses of shadowy figures in the corners of his vision, too quick to be real, yet undeniably present, beckoning him deeper into the forest's embrace, into the hollow of the ancient tree. Kyle tried to reason with himself, to cling to the last vestiges of his sanity, but his words were met with blank stares from the unseen presences, or dismissive murmurs that echoed his own deepest fears. His reality was shifting, his perceptions warped by the constant, insidious influence of the forest. He believed in the Pale Ones, in their waking, in the strange rituals he now felt compelled to perform, his face alight with a disturbing conviction. His survival gear, once his trusted allies, now seemed useless. His compass spun wildly, his GPS signal was dead, and his attempts to light a fire yielded only damp wood and smoke. The forest was not a physical barrier. It was a psychic one, a force that preyed on the very essence of consciousness, a predator of the mind, trapping him in its vast green labyrinth, a prisoner of his own unraveling thoughts. The forest, once his sanctuary, became a place of torment. The ancient trees groaned not with the wind, but with unseen presences. Shadows writhed in the corners, and the whispering wind through the branches seemed to carry the distorted voices of his past, calling to him, inviting him into the shared delusion that was consuming Redfern State Forest, a place swallowed by its own dark history. Kyle's own thoughts began to fragment, his memories blurring, his sense of self eroding. He found himself staring blankly at his reflection in a still pool of water, unsure of the face staring back. The whispers, no longer just external, began to merge with his own internal monologue, making it impossible to distinguish his thoughts from the entity's insidious suggestions. A terrifying echo chamber of madness, a symphony of his own undoing. As the fourth night approached, Kyle knew with a chilling certainty that he was lost. The forest was a collective nightmare, a living embodiment of madness, and he, despite his survival training, was being inexorably drawn into its terrifying embrace. The whispers were not just sounds. They were a siren song, luring him deeper into the abyss of shared delusion, a point of no return from which no one had ever returned. The fourth night brought a profound transformation to Redfern State Forest. The whispers were no longer just a cacophony. They were a unified chorus, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very ground beneath Kyle's feet. The air thickened, not with mist, but with a swirling, almost visible darkness that seemed to emanate from the ancient trees themselves. Kyle, his mind fractured, stumbled through the woods, drawn by an irresistible, terrifying compulsion towards the heart of the forest, towards the massive oak. The forest floor was no longer just earth and leaves. It was a pulsating, organic mass. Roots thick as python coils writhed and intertwined, forming grotesque patterns that seemed to mimic the scattered bone arrangements he had found earlier. The skeletal remains of animals were now embedded within these roots, their forms absorbed, their essence seemingly consumed by the living earth, becoming part of the forest's dark tapestry. Kyle pushed through the dense undergrowth, his own mind, a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts and fragmented memories. The whispers were a roar now, urging him to join the others, to embrace the truth that the forest had revealed. He saw fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures, their forms indistinct, their movements slow and deliberate, merging with the very trees around them, their faces contorted by a shared, horrifying ecstasy. As he reached the base of the colossal oak, the clearing now revealed as a vast natural amphitheater. A horrifying realization dawned on him. The ground around the tree was not just disturbed. It was excavated, revealing a network of vast subterranean tunnels, their entrances choked with gnarled roots. And from these tunnels, not bodies, but skeletal hands, long and impossibly thin, were slowly, deliberately reaching upwards, their bony fingers twitching, beckoning to the living. The ancient hunger that fed on the unraveling of human minds was not a metaphor, it was real. The whispers were not just sounds. They were an awakening, a psychic pulse that stirred the long dead. Parasitic entities buried beneath Redfern State Forest, the true Pale Ones, entities that fed on the sanity of the living, drawing them into a collective delusion that made them willing participants in their own demise. Their minds consumed as the full moon reached its zenith. casting long, grotesque shadows. The skeletal hands began to pull themselves free from the earth. Their movements slow, deliberate, and horrifyingly purposeful. They were not seeking to harm. They were seeking to merge. The shadowy figures, now clearer, revealed themselves to be the absorbed forms of past victims, their faces alight with a terrifying joy. Reaching out, offering their hands, their bodies, their very minds to the skeletal forms, embracing their oblivion. Kyle watched in frozen horror as a skeletal hand, impossibly thin and cold, reached out from the earth directly at his feet, its bony fingers beckoning, promising a horrifying peace. His brother's face flashed in his mind, then faded, replaced by the serene, blank expressions of the merging figures around him. The guilt, the trauma, the fear, it all began to recede, replaced by a strange, compelling calm. He screamed, a sound that was swallowed by the collective, joyful murmurs of the merging forms. He stumbled backward, away from the reaching hand, away from the horrifying truth of Redfern State Forest. But as he fled, a new chilling sensation crept over him. The whispers in his mind were gone, replaced by a single, deep, resonant hum, echoing not from the forest, but from within his own skull. Kyle ran, not towards escape, but deeper into the forest, his steps no longer frantic, but strangely deliberate. The trees no longer seemed to block his path. They welcomed him, their branches parting to reveal new, unseen trails. He was free of the madness, but he was not alone. The forest had found a new host. He found himself at the base of the colossal, ancient tree, its roots thick as buildings, its canopy blotting out the moon. He reached out, his hand touching the rough bark, and felt a profound connection, a sense of belonging he had never known. The hum inside his skull resonated with the tree's ancient pulse. He was no longer Kyle Mercer, the haunted graphic designer. He was a part of the forest now, another set of eyes, another pair of ears, another voice in the endless whispering chorus, waiting for the next lost soul to wander into Redfern State Forest.